Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Jake, the Muslim Metaphysician. We've got a very interesting episode for you guys today, continuing the saga here. So, as you can see, the title of the video is The Taqiyah of Khani Missionary Khalil Andani, because that's what he is. In reality, this individual is a missionary for the Aga Khan. He is the #1 missionary for the Aga Khanis. They really have nobody else, as far as I can tell, who's doing their bidding, their missionary work. They've got their little scholars here and there, but they're not doing what Khalil Andani is doing. They're not spending hours upon hours every week on Clubhouse, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all these different social media platforms, trying to put their narrative forward as far as their Ismaili theology, and debating and discussing with people constantly. Nobody else is really doing that from what I can see. If anybody else, Khalil, can tell me, then they can tell me who they are, and we'll take a look at them and refute them as well. And this, like I said, guys, this is just the beginning. You just got a little taste of what we're going to do last video, but we're going to be doing this more and more. We might have 10 videos. We might have 20 video series on this to clearly demonstrate that Khalil Andani completely wasted not only my time, but everybody's time in the debate, because he attempted to defend an umbrella position of which has contradictory positions in it. And that was my main point. It's like, you're not even giving me anything really to attack. If you haven't watched the previous video, you should go and watch it before you watch this one, or at least go back and watch the previous one. Okay, because this is lesson number 2. The first lesson, okay, that was the first lesson last time. We're on to lesson number 2. And lesson number 1 actually had some impact, because Khalil Andani himself admitted that Shahristani accused not only Ibn Sina, but all of the philosophers of Tashbih, which means what? They couldn't have the same version of tawheed. Okay? And you know who the only Ismaili scholar is that actually had that Khalil Andani quoted during his whole opening statement? None other than Shahristani, and none other than on the topic that we're going to talk about today, which was divine predication, and whether or not negative and relative attributes can be ascribed to God. Now, what Khalil Andani has basically done, which he wasn't man enough to actually do during the debate, I don't know why. I think mainly because he's dishonest. I think he actually knew, but he's very dishonest. And he didn't want to admit that under his view, he would have to say that Shahristani was wrong. He didn't want to have to do that, right? What are you guys talking about in the chat? Stop playing baby games, man. Just pay attention. If you don't want to pay attention and learn something, then get out of here. We don't have time for the foolishness. I don't have time to be moderating these chats, all right? So just relax and actually pay attention. Stop, with the bickering in the chats. Now, so Khalil Andani didn't have the bollocks to actually clearly denounce Shahristani's position, which would have negated him anyway, because he's the only scholar that he actually quoted from the Ismaili side in the whole debate, and not in the whole debate, in his opening statement. That's the only person he quoted. So that's what's pretty amazing to me, that the only person he quoted was, according to him, the only person he disagrees with. But don't worry, we're going to show you in just a second that you can't try to isolate Mr. Andani. You cannot try to isolate Shahristani and say he's the only one that had this understanding of predication. No, he's not. And don't try to limit to Madlung. He keeps going on about this Madlung article in 1977. My friend, I quoted at least 3 or maybe up to 5 other secondary sources saying the exact same things that I'm doing. I didn't rely just exclusively on a Madlung article. I quoted Walker. I quoted Griffel. I quoted Mr. Poor here from this text. I quoted Parvez Morwedge. I quoted many other Ismaili scholars or scholars of Ismaili studies, right? I didn't just quote one guy. So I'm sorry, but your straw man tactics aren't going to work, Khalil. Now, let's deal with the agenda. Why am I saying this guy is doing taqiyya? Well, first, he was doing taqiyya in the debate when he didn't want to admit that he would have to say that Shahristani was wrong for his criticism of Ibn Sina and saying that the philosophers, all of them, are guilty of Tashbih. That's what he said. That's what Shahristani said. And Khalil has to reject it. Otherwise, he's saying, look, you can take from Shahristani and Ibn Sina, and even though one is condemning the other, doesn't make any sense, right? So it's not going to make any sense whatsoever. Now, why I'm going to show you that this is open taqiyya? Well, because you're going to get it out of the horse's own mouth. This is not going to be coming from me here, right? This is going to be coming from Mr. Andani himself, explaining to you, because what I'm trying to tell you now is he's tried to isolate Shahr. In the beginning, he said, no, this is the position. Then I said, look, Shahristani clearly says otherwise. Now he's trying to isolate Shahristani and say, oh, it was just him that was saying this and he was wrong. Now I'm going to show you what? Okay, listen, everybody's complaining about this Abu guy. I don't even know what you're doing, but you're getting muted. You're getting muted just because of the simple fact, okay, that everybody's complaining about you and I don't have time to even investigate. Sorry, you pissed off too many people. So you're done, bro. We don't have time for these games. Now, guys, just chill out, pay attention, okay? We don't have time for this nonsense. Now, so he's trying to isolate Shahristani, and I'm saying, no, that's not going to work. I'm going to show you from your own mouth first, Nasr al-Khusra, who takes the same theory of predication and says, according to you, that the philosophers don't have the same understanding and version of tawheed. Very clearly, okay? So that's what we're going to do. And then after that, I'm going to go into, not Shahristani, I'm going to go into Nasr al-Khusra's text and elaborate on that even further and give you more primary sources and secondary sources to back up everything that I'm saying. This isn't an exclusive Shahristani view. It's the Ismaili view. But Khalil doesn't like it because he wants to fit in with his philosopher friends. But apparently 5-10 years ago, he would have been saying something different. He would have been, singing a different tune. So anyway, let's take a look at this video, which is going to expose his taqiyya and show that this guy is a liar. He's a shaitan straight up. And I'm going to tell you right out the barrel like it is, because this guy is a dishonest shaitan, very clearly. Now, let me share you. That's not the right one here. Okay, here we go. This is Mr. Andani himself. Okay, and it's from what? A guest lecture you see here at the bottom. Nasr al-Khusra, on which is the scholar, and then the text is on reason and revelation, or reason and philosophy, revelation and philosophy. Okay, by Khalil Andani. He has an article on this as well, which we're going to visit in a second. But let's take a look. Here's the question we want to investigate now. Do the philosophers and the Ismailis have the same understanding of tawheed when it comes to God and the divine attributes? If the answer is yes, then I'm wrong, and my argument in the debate goes out the window. I'm putting that right on the table. If I'm correct that they don't have the same version of tawheed and on God and his attributes, then Khalil is smashed because he couldn't really deal with it in a debate, and he loses the debate by default because of the simple fact that he was trying to defend a position which is internally contradictory. It would be like me trying to defend the Ash'ari position and the Athari position at the same time, which absolutely makes no sense. So let's take a listen to see what he has to say here.
I'm going to talk about 2 or 3 issues. The first thing I'll quickly talk about is Nasir's understanding of tawheed. I picked this because this is something we're already familiar with. The first 2 weeks of class, we studied different views on God and his attributes, and I've summarized them up here, the Ash'ari, Mu'tazili, and the Philosopher views. So Ismaili concepts of tawheed are always positioned in this context. A lot of time they're responding to what's already there. So unlike these views, for Nasir Khusru, God is not subject to any attributes whatsoever. God cannot be described by the 99 names, for example. So Nasir actually maintains that 99 names of God implies, multiple essences, and God is absolutely one. So you cannot actually have a God with 99 names or attributes. So Nasir rejects the literal names of God, but Nasir Khusru also rejects the opposite of those names. And this gets a little interesting, where you have a technique of double negation. So Nasir and the Ismailis would say, God is not knowing, and then they would add, and God is not knowing. The purpose here is to negate the positive attribute, because these are attributes of created things, and then negate the negative attribute because it is also an attribute of created things. And this is a form of apophatic theology that takes us far beyond the Ash'ari, Mu'tazili, or philosophical notions. Some of Nasir's views on tawheed are also directed against the philosopher's own views.
Okay, so I don't know if you're hearing that correctly, but as you saw on the screen, okay, you see on the top, Khalil has tawheed and God and his attributes. So it's on tawheed specifically. And what does he say there? What is he actually saying there? I transcribed his statement here, so I'll tell you exactly what he said. He says, so unlike these views for Nasir, which means unlike the view of the Mu'tazila, the Ash'aris, and the philosophers, which include Ibn Sina, right? What does he say? So unlike these views for Nasir, God is not subject to any attributes whatsoever. So he's assuming that they can be ascribed with attributes, and that the philosophers do. God cannot be described by the 99 names, for example. So Nasir actually maintains the 99 names of God implies, multiple essences. And God is absolutely one, so you cannot have a God with 99 names or attributes. So Nasir rejects the literal names of God, but he not just that, he also rejects the opposite of those names. And this gets a little interesting, he says, where you have a technique which is known as double negation. So the Ismailis just don't do negation, they do double negation. The Ismailis would say God is not knowing, and then would add, and God is not knowing. The purpose here is to negate the positive attributes because they are created. These attributes are of created things, and then the negative attributes as well, because it is also an attribute of created things. And this is a form of apophatic theology that takes us far beyond the Ash'aris, Mu'tazila, or philosophical notions. Okay, so he clearly says that this apophatic theology of the Ismailis takes you far beyond the Ash'aris, Mu'tazila, and philosophical notions. Why? Because as we saw in the last episode, that the philosophical understanding of the divine attributes is that they allowed for what are called negative attributes and relative or relational attributes to be ascribed to God. But as I showed with Shahristani last time, what does that mean? What we saw last time with Shahristani, he said that this is Tashbih. This is what he accused the philosophers of, was Tashbih, because of the fact that they ascribed negative and relative attributes to God. Now, Khalil's response to that is, oh, well, this is just Shahristani, basically. No, this is not just Shahristani. This is Nasr al-Khusraw saying it from your own mouth, saying that they don't have the same understanding of divine predication and attributes and the same understanding of tawheed. So we caught you, man. We caught you blatantly just lying right here. Why are you lying to the public? Come out and defend your actual view. Is it that you didn't have enough Ismailis to back you up? Well, we saw them all in the chat. So you should have just stayed with your Ismaili position. instead of trying to defend two contradictory versions of tawheed. Just intellectual and academic dishonesty. And everybody's disappointed that you came like this, that you came like that. And then you try to say, well, I'm bringing a clear argument, internal critique. You brought me a square circle with no target. That's what you brought. Okay. So let me finish. Let me keep playing this really quick. It's almost done, but let me keep playing this. Very clear for you guys. Inshallah ta'ala.
It was very common to say as a philosopher that God is the first cause. But Nasser will not accept that. He thinks it is wrong to say that God is a cause. And the reason why he says that is because in his definition, a cause necessarily produces its effect. But to say that God is a cause, that would tie him to his effect. So he rejects that. He also rejects the fact that God is a necessary being. Because for Nasser Khusru and these Ismaili thinkers, God is not qualified by being or non-being. So you have this completely attributeless God in Ismaili thought. And in that context, then, we will talk about how does Nasser Khusru understand creation. So,
okay, so what he said is, in Ismaili thought, you can't even say that God, and he contrasted it with the view of the philosophers, God is not a necessary being. He is not the first cause. He cannot be attributed with any attribute whatsoever, whether it be positive, negative, relative, or not relative. It doesn't matter. You cannot predicate any attribute. Okay? Very clear what he's mentioning here. And that means for Ibn Sina and the philosophers, they don't have the same theory of divine predication. And they do not whatsoever, even on the categories of attributes that can be applied. And we're going to see that even further. Now, let me go. I'm going to go to some primary sources now, okay? Because we're trying to investigate. I knocked one person off the list, Shahristani, because it seems to be baby steps with Khalil. He didn't want to admit this in the actual debate, but he admitted it on Twitter. And now afterwards, we're going for Nasser Khusraw now. And we're going to come after all your scholars and show they all have the same theory on predication. You're the one out because you're following the philosophers now. You've apostatized from the Ismaili faith, for better or worse. That's up to viewers to decide. But you're no longer an Ismaili, my friend. It's just obvious. It's blatantly obvious to anybody who's read these texts. But 99.9% of the audience hasn't read them. So I have to bring them out, dig them out, and read it and explain it to these people because you are too dishonest to actually be able to do that. Okay. Now, let's take a look. Why is Khalil saying this? Let's look at some primary sources. Well, Nasser Khusraw in his text, 6 chapters, he says this, and I quote on page 34. God is he who has brought from non-being into being, the initial being, so that existence and non-existence should both be created by him and should stand side by side of each other by his command. This is because both the quality and what is qualified by it are under his power, while he himself in his ipseity is above everything. And get this, and nothing can have a relation to him, just as he said, say, God is one. So what is he saying? He's denying relations for God. He's denying all attributes, all types of predication when it comes to existence, non-existence, the quality or what is qualified. He's denying everything. He's saying above everything. And what? And nothing can have a relation to him. So he's denying these relational attributes, which Ibn Sina and the philosophers accept. Furthermore, in the same text, Nasser Khusraw, 6 chapters, pages 30 to 31, he says this, and I quote, the categories of cause and caused, property and being in possession of a property, limit and being limited, cannot be either attributed to him or denied to him, or have any likeness to him. He is beyond being or non-being, and you must realize that everything to which you may attribute existence may also be predicated with non-existence as an opposite state, and nothing which has an opposite number can be a God. Meaning to say, anything that has an opposite to be caused or uncaused, right? To be the cause of something, or to, you can't predicate any of this. Property or being in possession of a property, limit and being limited. You can't, whether it be negative or positive, anything that has an opposite, being and non-being, existence and non-existence. They don't believe you can predicate any of that of God. So you can't just say, oh, we reject all positive attributes, but we accept these negative and relational ones. No, Nasr al-Khusraw is saying no. Nothing can have a relation to him. There is no relation to him. Okay? So you can't predicate these relational attributes of God for Nasr al-Khusraw. All these opposites must be rejected. Now, furthermore, in his text, Reason and Revelation, which is what the video was supposed to be on, he says this, and I quote, and this is about the Mu'tazila, but I'm going to show you that it applies to the philosophers as well in just a second. If these theologians have established that God is knowing, God too calls certain of his servants knowing, as in the verse, only those of God's servants who have some knowledge fear him. Thus, it is clear that to call God, praise be to him, knowing, is polytheism. Imagine that, to call God knowing is polytheism, according to Nasr al-Khusraw. And if these theologians assert that God is powerful, God too calls his own servants powerful, as in this verse, they went early determined on their purpose. This too is polytheism. And if these theologians say that God is living, God too calls his own servants living, as in the verse, do not reckon those who were killed in God's way as dead. No, they are alive with their Lord. They have provision from him. This is polytheism. And if these theologians establish that God, praise be to him, is hearing, God too has established that his own servants are hearing, as in the verse, until it hears like, and he goes on. About the speech of the unbelievers, he says, in this verse, they will say, this is an ancient lie. This is a heresy, bid'ah, which this group has invented in their ignorance. They have imposed these names on God. Imagine to call God knowing, or the all-knowing, we have somehow imposed these names on God. Astaghfirullah. No, it's in his Quran, in the Quran and the authentic Sunnah of the Prophet, alayhi salatu wassalam. We didn't impose these on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We didn't at all. The Quran and the Sunnah brought that to us, and we accept it. You're worried about me being an anthropomorphist. You can't even accept that God is knowing, that he has knowledge. You think that's polytheism. It's unbelievable that these guys think to say that God is knowing means that you're a polytheist and you're guilty of anthropomorphism, right? This is not the position of Ibn Sina and the Mu'tazila, who supposedly believe in divine simplicity. You're saying they're all guilty of polytheism because they say that God is knowing, right? So, astaghfirullah. It's ridiculous to try to sit here and make it seem like you have the same, like the philosophers and the Ismailis have the same beliefs. They don't. They're both upon kufr, but they don't have the same beliefs, clearly. Now, look at this. He actually, Nasr al-Khusraw on the same text, he actually says that the Mu'tazila are basically the same of the Karamiya, who were basically anthropomorphists, like clear on, right? So look, he says this, and I quote in the same text, Reason and Revelation. We say with regard to the oneness professed by this group, meaning the Mu'tazila, namely they're saying that God is knowing, not by a knowledge, powerful, not by a power, living, not by a life, hearing and seeing, not by actual hearing or sight, but rather by his very essence. That it is generally agreed by intelligent people that an attribute does not subsist through its own nature or that, but rather through what it qualifies, and that which it qualifies subsists through its own nature. According to this argument, which is beyond doubt, it is not right to qualify God by any attribute, for God's attribute is his very ipseity, nor may that attribute subsist in him. If his attribute were other than his very essence, it would be an accident in him. However, his ipseity is not a substrate of accidents. Hence, no attribute whatsoever should be ascribed to him. Concerning the doctrines of oneness of the Ismailis, those who enjoy divine assistance, that's what he claims, we shall give an exhaustive account of this somewhat later, since according to the doctrine of this group, there is an essence to which 6 different qualities pertain. First, knowledge, then power. Thirdly, life. Fourthly, hearing. Fifthly, seeing. And sixthly, eternity. This has to be in essence divided into 6 parts. For it is obvious that there can be knowledge without power. Now pay close attention to this part, because I'm going to show you that this argument right here that Nasr al-Khusraw is using actually applies to Khalil's Philosopher, friends. And I'm going to read an article out from Mr. Hasnain Naqvi, the Shia terrorist who approves of innocent Sunnis being slaughtered, right? I'm going to show from this guy's own article, what does it say? He actually is responding to a similar argument that Nasr al-Khusraw makes right here. So pay attention, listen. Nasr al-Khusraw says, for it is obvious that there can be knowledge without power, and power without knowledge, and both of these can be without life as well. Each of these 3 is possible without hearing, 4 of these without sight, and 5 of them without eternity, though all 6 are attributes. What he's saying is something can have knowledge without having power. Something can have power without having knowledge. Something can have hearing without having sight. All of these things can't be identical to each other because they don't have the same scope into what they apply to and the same meaning. This is his claim. Whether you agree with the argument or not, you'll see that this applies to the philosophers. To say that one essence is knowledge and the same essence is power is a nonsensical statement. Imagine that. So all you philosopher friends, when you watch this, your own friend, Mr. Khalil and Nasr al-Khusraw are takfiring you right here. They're telling you, look, you ain't actually on the proper tawheed. Plain and simple. You don't believe in the same God. And he's going to say, oh, but this is just talking about kufr and shirk when it comes to, this is just, you know, some minor, we don't have the same laws as the Sunnis. Forget about that. We're talking about afterlife here. I'm not talking about wajib al-qatl or anything like this kind of stuff. We're not talking about that kind of stuff. We're talking about theological matters here. Nasr al-Khusraw is saying, theologically, you guys are polytheists. This is what his claim is. Okay? Knowledge and power cannot be the same thing. He says to say that one essence is knowledge and same essence is power is a nonsensical statement. If both knowledge and power are one, it follows necessarily that anyone who is not knowing is powerful too. Thus, whoever says that God is knowing has also said that he is powerful. But if such is the case, it would be more economical to describe him by one attribute rather than all 6. So he's saying, why are you even bringing it up then if they're all the same? Since when you have pronounced one attribute, you have implied all the others as well. So it's irrelevant to mention all these different other ones. If such is not the case, and another signification applies to each attribute by virtue of its own essence, there would be one substance with 6 multiple entities, not a single unique one. On the contrary, whoever says that God is knowing without a knowledge, whoever, listen to this, whoever says that God is knowing without a knowledge, meaning without a sifa, without an attribute of knowledge, has said that he is unknowing, meaning he said that he doesn't know anything. Why? Because he's assuming in order to be knowing, you need a sifa, which is knowledge or having that attribute. You can't have it just by all these different things being identical to the essence. He's rejecting that. Whoever says that he is powerful without a power, meaning without the attribute of power, has said that he is powerless, which we would also agree with from Ahl Sunnah, but we would just come from a different angle and say, therefore, if he has power or is powerful, then that means that he has an attribute, which is power. So we actually agree on that point. We just diverge and say he actually is powerful, whereas the philosophers actually say what? They actually say that he does have power, he does have knowledge, but it's identical to the essence. Whereas the Ismailis want to diverge and say, no, we want to deny all these things with God whatsoever. And then he goes on further here. If such is the case, right? Oh no, so the other attributes too would have to be denied. So he says you have to deny all these attributes. The result would be what we expounded earlier regarding the doctrine of the group, the Karamiyya, who state that God is a body not like other bodies, such that one would say he is a body not like a body. But this is sheer raving. So he actually compares the Mu'tazilite doctrine and by extension the position of the philosophers, or having the same attributes that are identical to each other in the essence, as the same as the Karamiyya. He actually compares it to that. Wow. This doctrine of theirs, the Mu'tazilites, that attributes are attributes essentially, comes from a sort of fervor which has alighted within their hearts, a fervor which they cannot quite articulate correctly. In their discourse and their scrutiny, something other than what lies in the hidden insinuations of their hearts or their thoughts emerges. Okay? So, listen, he does not accept this. He says for anyone to say that God is knowing without knowledge is speaking nonsense. Straight up nonsense. Okay? Now, let's see from Khalil's own article. He wrote an article which published in Oxford Text on this very text itself by Nasr al-Khusraw, Reason and Revelation. So here's what he says, and I quote, Nasr argues that both attributes, knowledge and ignorance, life and death, power and incapacity, are inadmissible for God and must be negated from him. This is because both pairs of attributes are creaturely qualities and thus invalid for describing God. So what he's saying here, it's anthropomorphism or likening God to creation, Tashbih, to say that God is knowing. The philosophers don't believe that. They negate that idea. They can accept that God is knowing. Okay, which we'll see in just a second. Now further, he says, and I quote, this is because both pairs of attributes are creaturely qualities and thus invalid for describing God. You can't describe God this way. In this respect, Nasr articulates an Ismaili form of the via negativa called double negation. This position was first championed by Ismaili thinkers such as As-Sijistani and Abu Hatim al-Razi, while As-Sijistani and al-Razi negated qualities such as existence and non-existence, definition and non-definition, and perfection and imperfection from God. Nasr also employs double negation to negate Quranic names of God, such as the knowing, the living, and the powerful, as well as their opposites, which we just saw. Nasr concludes his critique of the Qadamiyya on the subject of the divine attributes by accusing them of merely projecting their own inadequate ideas of perfection and goodness onto God, and thus falling into shirk or polytheism. Quote, it is wrong to describe God by such attributes as ignorance and powerlessness, not because they are unseemly, but because they are attributes of creatures. So notice what he's saying. It's not just because that ignorance and to be powerless is a negative quality that we don't want to ascribe it to God. It's because it's an attribute of creation, because it's guilty of tashbih. So for the same reason, he says we must negate knowledge and power. They are attributes of creatures, as well as it is also wrong to ascribe opposites of attributes, such as knowledge and power, to him. Glory be to him. He is exalted on the grounds that these too are creaturely qualities. The so-called theologians of this community have plunged into grievous error in their inquiry, in ascribing their own fine qualities to God and declaring him devoid of their bad qualities. And for this very reason, they have fallen into polytheism. Okay? So by ascribing to God this idea of God being knowing and powerful, according to Nasr al-Khusraw, and as I showed last time, Shahristani, is not only incorrect, he says it's nonsensical and it results in polytheism and anthropomorphism. This is his claim, which is the same idea that Shahristani had as well. Very clear. Now, we showed as part of his argument, he was trying to say, here's the critique. He gave a rational critique. You can't say that knowledge and power are identical in God and identical to his essence, even on divine simplicity, because the meaning and scope of these things are not the same. Something can have power without knowledge and vice versa, or something can have more power than it has knowledge. And so they can't be the same thing. This is the whole critique. Now, we're going to show that this Shia named Hasnain Naqvi, who is a Shia terrorist and actually enjoys the fact that Sunnis are being killed in some of the lands where they live. He actually enjoys it, and we exposed that. Somebody exposed that before. But anyway, enough of that. Let's take a look at this terrorist thing here. This is his website, which is called Illuminationist Philosophy. Look at this garbage. Okay. Now, here he says Mullah Sadra on the doctrine of divine simplicity. Listen to what he says. According to the doctrine of divine simplicity, the divine attributes are identical to the essence. What does that mean? The divine attributes are identical to the essence. Nasr al-Khusraw and Shahristani said there are no divine attributes in that sense, and certainly can't be identical to every other attribute and identical to the essence because of the very argument that Nasr al-Khusraw was just given, that they don't have the same scope. But listen, he says here, and every attribute is identical to every other attribute. If every attribute is identical to every other attribute, then divine knowledge is identical to the attribute of power, which is what Nasr al-Khusraw was saying. And this is the view. Divine knowledge encompasses or includes things that are essentially possible, as well as things that are essentially impossible. But divine power is only associated with that which is essentially possible, and does not include the essentially impossible. In other words, what he's saying here is God can have knowledge of things that are essentially possible, meaning that they're possible to exist, and also things that are essentially impossible. He can have knowledge of those. But divine power, God's divine power, can only be attached with or associated with things that are essentially possible, meaning things that he can actually create or instantiate, and does not include the essentially impossible, because God doesn't create a square circle. So he's saying they don't have the same scope. They don't have the same meaning, and they don't have the same scope. He's setting up the argument for us, which, as we see, is matching or not exactly identical, but is related to Nasr al-Khusraw's argument to try to establish it's nonsensical to say that these two attributes cannot be identical to each other and the essence. Therefore, apparently it seems as if the scope of divine knowledge exceeds the scope of divine power, and consequently divine knowledge is distinct and other than divine power. But if divine knowledge is distinct and other than divine power, then this implies that the doctrine of divine simplicity is false. So he's admitting that if this is true, divine simplicity is false. And this is the very argument that Nasr al-Khusraw is making. Now, forget about whether you accept it or not. It's merely to show you guys of the very simple fact that the Ismailis and the philosophers, the Sadrians and the Masha'iyun, those who follow Ibn Sina, do not have the same theory of tawheed, do not have the same understanding of God and his attributes. They don't. The Sadrians and those who follow Ibn Sina accept that God can have these attributes that are identical to each other and identical to the essence, right? Which are these, and they can try to conceive them as negative attributes. The Ismailis say, no, this is nonsensical, number one, for the arguments just given. It's nonsensical because you can't have these attributes without, or you can't say that God is knowing unless he has a sifa or an attribute. They think that's nonsensical, which we actually agree with. Okay. And they also say that it's tashbih in order to even call God knowing, or to even say that God has power and knowledge, right? And then on the other hand, they say it makes no sense to say that they're identical. Nasr al-Khusraw is giving the argument. You can't say they're identical to each other because you could have one without the other, have more of one than the other, meaning they'd have different scopes. Now, then he goes on here. He says, a Sadri in response to the above stated objection, and then he goes on to give a response to this objection. Now, I'm not even going to go through this objection because it's not really relevant to my point. My point is to say that Nasr al-Khusraw is making an argument against the philosophers themselves. And you know who that guy is? Hasnain Naqvi, who is the Brethren of Purity clowns, who Mr. Khalil hangs out with all the time. And he's refuting them. And Nasr al-Khusraw is saying, we do not have the same view on divine predication. Sorry, my friend. Okay, now, this shows how dishonest Khalil was in a debate, trying to defend simultaneously and put this big umbrella and say, oh, I'm defending these groups. Yeah, they're all saying the same thing. No, they're not. Stop lying to the people. We're here to expose your taqiyya and your falsehood that you're propagating on the behest of the Aga Khan himself, another fraud. We're removing this fraudulent nonsense from the sphere, okay? And we're letting people know what's going on here. We're not playing around. Now, in the same text, going back to Nasr al-Khusraw's text, he says this: everyone who listens with scrupulous attention to the critique which we have made of the doctrine of oneness of this group, meaning the Mu'tazila, and turns it over reflectively in his mind, will recognize that it is a correct critique, meaning you must accept that this is a correct critique. Any reasonable person would. To posit one essence with 6 different attributes is not true tawheed. Quite the opposite. It is to posit a multiplicity. Nor can it be true tawheed to ascribe creaturely qualities to God. On the contrary, that is anthropomorphism. The group never sees anything better than themselves, and indeed fancy themselves to be God. That is error, extreme error. So they've made themselves God. Honestly, this is what he's saying. That anyone who believes that God has these attributes, even if they're identical to the essence, as the Mu'tazila and the Philosopher said, is guilty of anthropomorphism and don't have true tawheed. So he wanted to, in one sense, during the debate, he tried to make me opposite to one of my friends, Muhammad Hijab, shout out to him, which I still haven't spoken to him about this issue yet. But nevertheless, he wanted to make it seem like we had a conflict, which I wasn't defending Hijab's position in the debate, so it's really irrelevant. But I'm showing you here that you were trying to defend Islamic philosophy, which includes this group, and at the same time a group which opposes them. So within Islamic philosophy, you have Ibn Sina, Mullah Sadra, and all these other guys. And at the same time, you're including Shahristani, Nasr al-Khusra, As-Sijistani. And these 3 are opposed to one another. Your Ismailis are saying that they're guilty of anthropomorphism and don't have true tawheed, and refute your buddy, the terrorist, Shia terrorist, Hasnain Naqvi. Okay? Now, you yourself commenting on this passage, Khalil, you yourself commenting on this passage about the Mu'tazila, say what? Nasr then attempts to refute the Mu'tazilite doctrine that at least some of God's attributes are identical with his essence, the so-called Mu'tazilite doctrine of essential attributes. He notes that an attribute cannot subsist by itself, but only through what it qualifies, right? The sifa cannot subsist by itself unless it has something which it qualifies with the mawsuf. And any such attribute would be an accident in God's essence, thus qualifying God with any sort of attributes, whether it be negative or positive. Those are my words, whether it be negative or positive, but that's what he's saying, leads to his essence being a substrate of accidents. This leads Nasr to conclude that an essence with 6 different attributes, knowledge, power, life, hearing, seeing, and eternity, is actually a composite substance. This doctrine of theirs, Nasr writes, that attributes are attributes essentially, comes from a sort of fervor which has alighted within their hearts, a fervor which they cannot quite articulate correctly, close quote. Then Khalil starts talking again. Nasr concludes his critique of the Mu'tazilites by accusing them of the very anthropomorphism that they sought to avoid. And this goes to all these 12er Shia. All these 12er Shia out there that actually support the Mu'tazilite doctrine, or even you Christians. He is accusing you, you Thomists, and you people who believe in divine simplicity. According to Khalil and the Ismaili theology, you're all guilty of anthropomorphism and polytheism. So you don't have to support me, but you're supporting a guy who believes you're polytheist anyway. Go ahead. Doesn't matter to me. Then he goes on further to say, to posit one essence with 6 different attributes is not true tawheed. Quite the opposite. It is to posit a multiplicity. Nor can it be true tawheed to ascribe creaturely attributes to God. On the contrary, that is anthropomorphism. This group never sees anything better than themselves, and indeed they fancy themselves to be God, which is what we just quoted earlier. Close quote. Then Khalil himself says, through his critique of the literalists, the Karamiya, right, the Karamites, and the Mu'tazilites, it is evident that Nasr al-Khusra's concept of tawheed negates all attributes and qualities from God, such as knowledge, life, power, hearing, and sight. He equally negates the opposites of these attributes from God, namely ignorance, death, incapacity, deafness, and blindness. As will be seen in subsequent parts of this text, right? Nasr also exalts God above intelligibility and oneness. So he's above intelligibility and even oneness. In another work, he elevates God above philosophical and ontological categories, such as cause and effect, unity and multiplicity, existence and non-existence, and necessary and contingent being. This overall perspective serves as the foundation for Nasr's Neoplatonic metaphysics, close quote. which shows you he does not believe he's the necessary being. He does not believe he's perfect. He does not believe he is pure existence. He does not believe he is knowledge and has knowledge and power and all these things are identical to each other. No. He says to say all this, you're guilty of tashbih, anthropomorphism, polytheism, shirk, all of this stuff. This is what you are guilty of, my friends. So the Mu'tazila out there, who actually you're supporting Khalil, he's saying that you are a polytheist. The Christians out there, Unitarian or Trinitarian, he's saying you are a polytheist because you believe in this. Even if you believe in divine simplicity, you're still guilty of anthropomorphism. Okay? So go ahead, sign with the guy who's calling you an anthropomorphist, right? Now, furthermore, listen to this statement from Mr. Nasr al-Khusraw himself. And in his statement, right, here he goes. Wait 1 second here. No, this is not, this is not Nasr al-Khusraw. I was about to read you Shahristani. He says here, and I quote, and in his statement, the necessary of existence is one in respect of the perfection of its existence. He did not explain perfection and did not understand that perfection is a deficiency for him. Did you hear that? Shahristani said that perfection is a deficiency for God. Imagine that. To call God perfect is a deficiency. One of the sages has said, the greatest self-sufficiency is his, to whom the creation and the command belong. Majestic is our Lord and exalted above being characterized by perfection, a fortiori of being characterized by deficiency. For he makes perfect whatever is perfect, and makes complete whatever is deficient. Then, if Ibn Sina meant by perfection that he perfects everything perfect, that is true. However, he is obliged to follow this proposition through for every attribute, even for existence, so that he says he is existent in the sense that he existentializes every existence, is necessary of existence in the sense that he necessitates every existence, is knowing in the sense that he causes whatever is knowing to know, and powerful in the sense that he empowers whatever is powerful. Yet that is not the man's procedure. So Shahristani says that is not what Ibn Sina does. Were that the doctrine he espoused, he would not have upheld the universality and inclusivity of existence, and he would have judged that existence is amongst purely equivocal terms, as we explained above. So you have to understand there are three types of predication. The equivocal, which is like a river bank, and a bank, which is a financial institution, which are two completely different meanings. Then you have an analogy, which the same word can be ascribed and it means something similar. And then you have univocal, which you use the same word and it describes exactly the exact same thing, right? So anyway, we're showing quite clearly that Shahristani, in agreement with Nasr al-Khusraw, is saying that any predication of God can only be used as a means of equivocal predication, not univocal predication, not analogous or ambiguous predication, analogical predication. Cannot be used. And Ibn Sina's doctrine when it comes to existence was on a basis of analogical predication, not on the basis of equivocal predication. Okay? Now, here we go. We'll see here from, let's see. Okay, this is from Khalil's favorite article, Mr. Madla, okay, where he's going to quote on this. Shahristani criticizes Ibn Sina's comprehensive concept of being, wujud, which includes both God, the necessary being, and the contingent world. This concept, he suggests, tends to turn being into a genus or genus-like concomitant, whose parts are distinguished by differentia, and thus are necessarily composed. In order to escape this consequence, Ibn Sina maintained that being applied to God and the contingent world analogically, right? Bil tashkik, right? So that's what you see here, that existence for Ibn Sina applied to both God and the contingent world, the necessary being and the contingent beings, analogically, or bil tashkik. rather than univocally, which is what Shahristani held, and thus does not comprise them in equal manner. Now, he says, Shahristani says, even with this analogical concept of being, Ibn Sina's necessary being, as Shahristani argues, can be shown to contain multiplicity. The term wujud, he insists, cannot be applied to God either univocally or analogically, but only equivocally, right? Bil ishtirak. You cannot do it univocally or analogically. It has to be equivocally. Used in reference to God, its meaning has nothing in common with its meaning in contingent beings. God is a necessary being only in the sense that he gives being to others, which is the text that we just read, and takes it away from them. Similarly, all other names and attributes used in respect to God must be understood equivocally. All names and attributes must be understood equivocally, according to Shahristani and Madlung's interpretation and understanding of Shahristani. God is truth, in a sense that he makes the truth valid and falsehood void. He is living, in the sense that he gives life and death. Opposites like being and non-being, unity and multiplicity, knowledge and ignorance, life and death, good and evil, power and impotence, are like disputants in a lawsuit. God is above them as their judge, or hakim. Ibn Sina's attempt to prove the existence of God on the basis of his comprehensive concept of being is thus futile. In reality, there is no need for a proof of God. Don't worry, we'll get back to that at a later date. Today, we're focusing on divine predication to show Mr. Andani's Taqiyah that Ibn Sina and the Ismailis and the philosophers in general, they do not have the same concept of divine predication, right? Now, here we go. Ibn Sina's attempt to prove the existence of God on the basis of his concept of comprehensive concept of being is thus futile. In reality, there is no need for a proof of God. I know the Hershey, Khalil. For God is too apparent to require an indication for his presence. Knowledge of God indeed rests on innate predisposition, or the fitra. To deny him is to deny oneself. He who denies the absolute judge judges himself and confirms him by his judgment. This is the reason why the prophets have confined themselves to preaching the unity of God, the denial of partners and equal opponents, since a proof of God was unnecessary. That's what Madlung says. But the main point of why I'm quoting this is to show that when it comes to existence, they do not believe in the same type of predication. Shahristani, Nasr al-Khusra, and the Ismailis in general, they believe that it is a matter of equivocal predication, bil ishtirak, rather than a analogical predication, or bil tashkik, right? Now, furthermore, this is from Khalil's same article on when he references how Nasr al-Khusra understands the universal intellect, which is the first being. He says the universal intellect that contemplates its own essence is intellect, intellector, and intellected. So he says that what? The universal intellect for the Ismailis and Nasr al-Khusra is intellect, intellector, and intellected. Now remember that, because now I'm going to show you how the God of the philosophers is the universal intellect for the Ismailis, to show that they're not the same being. Now, in the same text, Khalil Andani himself says, and I quote, "At the conclusion of this chapter, Nasr notes that the meaning knowing and intelligent cannot be applied to God directly, and instead refer to the originated universal intellect." Now, why is that the case? Is that in line with the theory of predication of Shahristani and the rest of the Ismailis? Yes. Look at this. Let's take a listen from the same text that we quoted earlier by Shahristani, which is called Struggling with the Philosopher, Ibn Sina. Listen what he says here on that point. Remember those three terms: intellect, intellector, and intellected. "I say to you, you stipulated three considerations in the essence of the necessary of existence, and glossed each consideration with a proper meaning, each of which is not to be understood from the other. That is patent Trinitarianism, and exalted be God above being the third of three. This is not a slander, but the absurd implication of multiplicity in his essence in respect of one another, in respect of one consideration in another, just as it attaches to the Christians in respect of one hypostasis in another, one person in another. His excuse for multiplicity and consideration, that it does not necessitate two in the essence, is of no avail. Doesn't matter if he says that to him. For the thing through which his excuse is correct, such that it negates the two, namely that the result of the two things is that one, it has an abstract quiddity, which is itself, and that two, its abstract quiddity belongs to it, removes the very thing which there would be a multiplicity of considerations in its essence in the first place. So he's saying, if you remove it and you reduce it anyway, you can't have these considerations, right? Which is what Nasr al-Khusraw was saying. Knowledge and power can't be the same thing. It's nonsensical. So why is it that he posits them as considerations and then removes them by this interpretation, just as the Christians lay down the Trinity in divine persons and remove it by way of unification and substantiality, saying one in substantiality, three in persons? So clearly, Shahristani is accusing Ibn Sina's God of being similar to the Trinity. Why? And we'll see why it is very clearly, right? Here in that same article by Madlung is why it's going to tell you very clearly why. Ibn Sina's doctrine that God is in essence under three aspects, intelligence, intellecting, and intelligible, is equally repudiated by Shahristani as implying a trinity in God similar to the Trinity affirmed by the Christians. Criticizing and rejecting Ibn Sina's complex theory of knowledge of God with its distinction between the modes of his cognition of himself, of universals and of particulars, Shahristani insists that the knowledge of God equally includes universals and particulars and postulates a hierarchy of knowledge and reasoning. The human capacity of reason is higher than that of animals, and the knowledge of angels is superior to that of men. Reason and knowledge apply to men and angels only equivocally. The cognition of angels does not depend on representative and affirmation, definition and syllogism, like that of men. The knowledge of God is beyond these methods of cognition. Okay, so this is on. This is very clear for you guys to see that Ibn Sina's God is what? Three things: intelligence or intellect, intellecting, and intelligible, which is the same thing that Khalil described as the universal intellect, and he said that these names cannot be applied to God. Therefore, Ibn Sina's concept of God is equivalent to the universal intellect, which is the exact same thing that Paul Walker says, which is the exact same thing that Madlung says, which is the exact same thing that Griffel says, and all these other scholars. So I wasn't misrepresenting. Now, further on the point of when it comes to being itself, how I mentioned earlier, Madlung again says, God in Ibn Sina's theology does not transcend being, which Khalil claimed he did. He doesn't. And I'm going to show you from Ibn Sina's own primary sources in both English and Arabic in just a second that he didn't. Not only did he believe that he was wajib al-wujud, or the necessary being, he also considered him mawjud as well, an existent thing. Ibn Sina described him as the necessary being, wajib al-wujud. He does not transcend being. This concept was indeed the basis of his proof of the existence of God, which argued from the essential contingency of the world for the need of an ultimate necessary cause. Nor did God, in Ibn Sina's view, transcend reason. He described him as, in essence, an intellect, intellecting, and intelligible, which is the exact same thing that Khalil said cannot be ascribed to God and must be ascribed to the universal intellect. So the God of Ibn Sina is the God, the God of Ibn Sina is the universal intellect for Khalil and not the same God. So they don't have the same tawheed. God was in this respect similar to the principles of the spiritual world, which Ibn Sina also defined as pure intellect. In agreement with the philosophical tradition, he described God as the first cause, affirming the thesis that one can proceed only from one. He held that God brought forth the first intellect by necessity, not by active volition. Viewing God as in principle intelligible, Ibn Sina discoursed freely on his nature, his attributes, and on the spiritual world in purely rational terms, without recourse to scriptural arguments or religious symbolism, which is what the Ismailis at least attempt to do. His theology resembled in this respect that of the Mu'tazila. Despite the many points of conflict between him and them, Al-Ghazali, in his criticism of Ibn Sina's philosophy, could maintain that his view on the divine attributes basically agreed with the Mu'tazili taqiyya, which is basically the idea of negation that the Mu'tazila believed in. He's saying their view on the attributes, Madlung is saying their view on the attributes is the same as the philosophers in Ibn Sina. Their view on the attributes is basically the same as the Mu'tazila. Very similar. Not identical, but very similar, at least in the respect that is the same in order for the criticism of Nasr al-Khusraw's idea of criticizing the Mu'tazila to get off the ground. It's the same thing in that respect. Reason, in his view, has indeed no need of prophetic guidance in attaining knowledge about the divine. That's according to Madlung. And I know that one kind of bothers Khalil, but you'll get over it, buddy. You just got to adopt a new theology instead of this garbage. Now, I'm going to go now to this text, which is Nasr al-Khusraw, Knowledge and Liberation, a treatise on philosophical theology, which is has an introduction by Parvez Morwedge, which I actually quoted in the debate. Okay. So in the intro, he says this: for Ibn Sina, being and its modalities of necessity, contingency, and impossibility are the two a priori notions in the mind, right? Okay, listen, I'm not going to tolerate you, Mr. Prof, another letter to keep calling people low IQ and this kind of stuff. Just calm down, man. We don't want to hear that, okay? You guys don't need to be constantly insulting people. This is ridiculous. Just watch the video and try to learn something, okay? Now, here we go. Back to the text, because you guys are distracting with this foolishness. Okay. Here. All right. For Ibn Sina, being and its modalities of necessity, contingency, and impossibility are the two a priori notions in the mind. Once we conceive the concatenation of necessity, wajib, with being, wujud, by the second ontological argument by the reality of the necessary existence, wajib al-wujud, is implied, because the necessary being necessarily exists. Then the emanation of the other existence are implied from it by its feature of being the super perfect or fawq al-tamam. Nasr al-Khusraw has a different theory. Notice, Nasr al-Khusraw has a different theory. His cosmology includes God, the word, kalima, or command of God, right? And two kinds of existence, the necessary and the contingent. The command of God is the absolute existent, under which there is the necessary existent, which is the universal intellect. So who is the necessary existent or being? The universal intellect, not God, which again goes back to who's the first cause, who's the first being, who's the necessary being. All these for Ibn Sina, what? God. Who is it for Nasr al-Khusraw and the Ismailis? It's not God. It's what? The universal intellect. So the God of Ibn Sina is the universal intellect for the Ismailis. Very clear and straightforward. This is from the intro by Parvez Morwedge, another secondary source. I'm not just relying on Madlung and Walker. I quoted about 5, 6 or more secondary sources. Okay, so Khalil, you're on an island here, my friend. Sorry to tell you this. Okay, then he says, the universal intellect, followed by the contingent existent, the universal soul, which is the actual maker. So get this, the creator of the world is actually the universal soul, not God, under Khalil's system. God is not inexistent. He's not mawjud, according to Nasr al-Khusraw. But for Ibn Sina, we'll see that he is in just a second. And his essence is above the attribution of an entity with an opposition. Since not being is the opposite of being and existent, neither existence nor non-existence can be attributed to God. Okay, very clearly. Now, here we see, again, Parvez Morwedge, same on a commentary of this text. Is he going to throw Parvez Morwedge under the bus? Khalil, you want to throw him under the bus too? And where he's showing you that Ibn Sina and Nasr al-Khusraw do not have the same God? Here he says on pages 118 and 120, and I quote, "For Ibn Sina, the ultimate being, the God of monotheism, is the necessary existent, which exists even if it is not a substance. For Nasr al-Khusraw, the ultimate being is God who, in his essence, is beyond existence and non-existence. The necessary being, therefore, is the first intellect, which is the generator of all other existence. We recall the author's insistence that existence cannot be applied to God. Instead, it applies to the first intellect, which is also the necessary being." Very clear. It's very clear and straightforward for you guys. Okay. Now, here's what I want to do. Let me show you. I'm going through all this to show what Nasr al-Khusraw, Shahristani, and the Ismailis believe, and I showed you from secondary sources, Madlung, Morwedge, and we can go on forever, baby, but we just don't have enough time. Let me show you here. Let me go back to Khalil's original video, which is what I started off with. Look at this. Okay, you see this photo here? This is from his presentation on Nasr al-Khusraw, on the text we were reading earlier. Tawheed, God and divine attributes. So listen how he describes them. The Ash'aris believe God has attributes, life, knowledge, power, oneness, eternity, will, etc., and are distinct from his essence. God creates all things, both good and evil. Now, that's different than the Mu'tazilite doctrine, according to Khalil, which it is, but I'm just saying, I'm just showing you the breakdown. God's attributes, living, knowing, powerful, one, eternal, etc., are identical to his essence. God only creates the good, evil comes from creatures. So you see the difference? One has attributes which are not identical to the essence. One has these attributes which are identical to the essence. Now here comes the philosophers. God is the first existent, the first caused, and pure intellect. So God is pure intellect. God's attributes are identical to God's essence. Al-Farabi. Necessary being, Ibn Sina. Existence are emanations from God. So what does he say? The attributes are identical to God's essence. And he's saying that's the view of Al-Farabi, who's a philosopher. And that for the philosophers like Ibn Sina, God is the necessary being, the first cause, and the pure intellect, and the first being. Now, he juxtaposes that with the classical Ismaili thought. So now he's making a ijma. He's saying this is classical Ismaili thought, not just Nasr al-Khusraw. What? God transcends all positive and negative attributes, including the 99 names. Double negation. God is not knowing and not knowing. He is not living and not living. He is not powerful and not powerful, etc. God is beyond both cause and effect. He is neither intelligible nor material. God cannot be a necessary being since he transcends being and non-being. Right? And then he quotes Nasr al-Khusraw, which is the same quote we went over earlier. Okay? So very clear that he's even admitting here that the philosophers do not have the same understanding of Tawheed, God, and divine attributes as the classical Ismailis. So it's not only Shahristani, it's Nasr al-Khusraw and all of the rest of Ismailis. And don't worry, I'm mainly focused on Khusraw here, but I'm going to go through As-Sijistani next. And I'm going to show you the same thing with As-Sijistani until you got nobody left to hide from, which you don't already anyway, because you're already admitting this isn't even just Nasr al-Khusraw. This is the Ismaili classical opinion. Okay? Very clear. Now, let me go further here for you folks. I want to show you something. I showed you all this stuff and I made a lot of claims about Ibn Sina, but now I'm going to show you from another secondary source and a primary source as well on Ibn Sina. Let's see. What did he say? What did Ibn Sina say about God? Let's see. What did Ibn Sina actually say about God? Now let's see if Shahristani is the only one out here and he's just misrepresenting everybody. Is that true? Let's see if he's going to throw another secondary source under the bus as well. Is he going to throw Peter Adamson under the bus? Is he going to throw all these people under the bus until he has no scholars left? I don't know. It could be. So here's an article here, which is called, let me just get you the exact title of the article, which is called From the Necessary Existent to God, Peter Adamson. Peter Adamson, who's very well known and very well respected, in a text which is called Interpreting Avicenna or Ibn Sina Critical Essays. And it was edited by Peter Adamson. And this specific article was actually written by Adamson himself. So now I'm going to show you from these texts. And I had all this stuff during the debate. This is not me doing research afterward. I had all this. And people who know because I shared some of it with them. So let me show you it right here. Okay. We'll see here. This is a screenshot from the text that I was just referencing, Peter Adamson. And he's citing the metaphysics, right? Ash-Shifa, which is by Avicenna or Ibn Sina. What does he say here? He said the primary attribute, as-sifa al-ula, right? The primary attribute of the necessary existent is the fact that it is and is existent. What? Mawjood. The primary attribute, so he has attributes, and his primary attribute is what? That he is existent. Not just that he's wujud, but he's also mawjood. Which Khalil and the Ismailis would never accept. So we're embarrassing you with this taqiyya, my friend. We're embarrassing you. Then some of the other attributes combine in their concept this existence together with a relation, while others are this existence together with a negation. According to this general rule, there are three kinds of things we can say about the necessary existent. According to Ibn Sina, what are the three things we can say? Is what? First, that there is indeed a necessary existent. So the first thing is that there is a necessary existent. Okay? That's the first thing. Now, let me go further here. No, okay, back here, sorry. Here he says, and this is a continuation, well, different part of the text, but he's basically saying the same thing. We can see why we recall that in his rule on attributes, meaning Ibn Sina, he actually recognizes three acceptable kinds of attribute for the first, meaning for God. Not only negations and relations, but also sheer existence. Indeed, this was identified as God's primary attribute. Okay? God's primary attribute is sheer existence. So according to Peter Adamson, Ibn Sina can be attributed with wujud, mawjud, so he can be attributed with existence and be an existent, and that's the primary attribute, right? And then not only that, he can also be attributed with negations and relations. All three of these, negations, relations, and existence, the Ismailis, Nasr al-Khusraw, As-Sijistani, Shahristani, all of them reject it. So they don't have the same view of tawheed. Okay? Now, next, let's go to another text here. We're not just showing you one thing, we're showing you everything. And all the citations are here if anybody needs. I'm going to bring up the Arabic on the screen for people who want to see it in just a second. Avicenna's rule is meant to accommodate divine simplicity, such that there is no multiplicity of real attributes in God and no quiddity that would be predicated of him, while also allowing for substantive theological predication. As he says, and he gives the citation here, it is impossible that an existent, look at this, it is impossible that an existent be so ineffable that it is immune to even to negation. What? And relation. He says that it's impossible for a being, no matter how ineffable, to escape the categories of negation and relation. So what? So we describe God, but only by negating features of him that would be shared in common with something else and affirming relations with him. So we negate everything for him, and then we affirm relations for him. The Ismailis do not do this. They do not affirm relations, as I showed earlier in Knowledge and Liberation. From Nasr al-Khusraw, he explicitly stated, we don't accept that anything is related to God. Here, what does Ibn Sina say? He actually says, and this is a refutation of the Batiniya and the Ismailiyah. the Ismailis. This is a refutation of them. Why? He says it is impossible that an existent be so ineffable, meaning so unknowable, which is Khalil's position, that is immune to negation and relation. Okay? So he's directly refuting your view, Khalil. Why? Why is he refuting your view? We'll see it in a second. We'll remind the audience. With this in mind, we can suggest a neat equivalence between the features of the necessary existent and the types of attributes recognized by Avicenna's rule. Necessity, which is an intrinsic trait, basis for negations. Cause, extrinsic trait, basis for relations. On this interpretation, Avicenna would be treating the first intrinsic necessity as amounting simply to okay, so as you can see here very clearly, my friends, that he is demonstrating to you that you have the necessity, you have the cause, which is the basis of relation, and remember that nothing is related to God because he's beyond cause and effect, right? And he's also beyond necessity, so he can't have the negations either, or the negative attributes. That's why they do the double negation, right? Now, last one. Indeed, if we turn ahead to the cure, and he goes on to cite the text from Ibn Sina, we can see Avicenna using the individuation argument to establish uniqueness rather than simplicity. The true nature of the first exists for the first and for nothing else, right? حقيقة الأول. And then what does he say? موجود الأول, right? Very clearly. Now we're going to show you this in the primary sources because people don't think we're just playing around here. We're going to show you in the primary sources where this is stated. So anybody that wants to see it, you got it. We got you right here. We got you right here. Here we go. Okay, here we go right here. You can see this text. This is the Arabic text, which is referencing what we just were mentioning from what's his name, Peter Adamson's article itself. Okay, so if anybody can't understand it, I'm not understand it. If anybody can't see it, we zoom it in here for you, nice and easy, guys. You guys can take a screenshot of this, and you can see it again. We have the same thing here, right? Same text, same exact text. It's in Ash-Shifa by whatchamacallit, what's his name? Ibn Sina. Sorry, I had a I had a brain fart there. So we see here Sifati Salbiya, right? So we have the negative attributes right here, which is clearly mentioned, right? And we have wajib al-wujud, and we have the negative attributes very clearly mentioned, okay? So he's not making this up. This is Ibn Sina's position, and even Dr. Khalil himself would admit that. Now, how does this go back to this? Remember that for Khalil, God transcends all positive and negative attributes. God is also beyond cause and effect. So he can't have the, remember that Peter Adamson says you get the negative attributes from God's necessity, which they believe God transcends necessity and contingency. Therefore, you can't have the negative attributes for the Ismailis. That's why you have the double negation rather than single negation. And if you see clearly in all their texts, they say single negation is Tashbih. It's a hidden anthropomorphism. Shahristani says that. They all say that. So Khalil, we're breaking this down for people, man. You can't fool people. You can't fool people. Because when the Muslim metaphysician actually engages in a debate, I do my research, bro. I'm coming correct. I'm not coming with this stuff that you're bringing. I'm coming correct. Now, God cannot be a necessary being since he transforms being and non-being. So the three things which Ibn Sina affirms, being or poor existence for God, necessity, which there you get the negative attributes from, and what? Cause, him being a cause, which you get the relational attributes from. Your classical Ismailis reject all that. That's why you have here, your contradistinction to the philosophers, God is the first cause and first being. You reject that. You reject that he's the pure intellect. You reject that. God's attributes are identical to his essence. You reject that. You reject he's a necessary being, which you did right here. Come on. And you reject that these are emanations from God. Completely different. And you have it listed here as tawheed, not me, God and divine attributes. Completely different. You yourself said it. So you're caught out, my friend. We caught you red-handed. We caught you doing taqiyya. We caught you trying to trying to obfuscate the issue in a debate with Shahristani, which is the only person you quoted, ironically enough. But then you threw him out on Twitter because it just came too hard on you when I brought this text for you. It came too hard on you when I brought creation and command, which I'm going to go back to give a quick recap now, right? So remember what we're showing here now, based on everything we're saying here about this. Now let's show you from the debate here. Now let's show you again from the debate. You got busted big time. Now, this is from the debate. Ismaili hikmah and falsafa. God as necessary being and beyond, right? So what does he say here? He is only described by means of negating similarities, right? Which are the negation, negative attributes, and affirming to him all relations. So relations are affirmed for him. Nasr al-Khusraw said nothing is related to him. Why? In order to be related, he would have to be a cause. But he is not a cause. He's beyond cause. So we got you. For all things are in him, and he shares nothing in common, blah, blah, blah. Goes on. Now, what does he say here? Ibn Sina utilizes a theory of ambiguous predication for speaking about God's existence and contingent existence. Ibn Sina admits God in his essence is only described by negations and his... So listen, what does he say here? He uses ambiguous predication for God's existence and that his essence can be described by negations, both of which are unacceptable, as we just saw, to the Ismailis. Very clear. Okay? So we got you busted, man. We got you busted big time, buddy. Now, let me go back here to show you what the relevance is. Remember, in the first part of the debate, he lists all these people. All these people are on his side. Neoplatonists, they're all on his side. Well, maybe in a broad category, but no. He actually slandered above the people on here, like Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. We showed, what are you talking about? He believes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has two hands, is above his throne. He even cites the hadith of the woman who pointed up in front of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. So what are you talking about, man? It's unbelievable. It's completely unbelievable, man. Honestly. So anyway, look, the poor Ismailis, they didn't get that many names. Ikhwan al-Safa, we got Abi Yaqub al-Sijistani, Kermani, which we're going to get to Kermani. He's going to really bust him down too. Nasr al-Khusraw, who we'll be going over now. Anyway, you got all these names. The great Aga Khan himself, Imam, the fake Imam. We're going to bust him down at some point too. We got Ash-Shahristani here. Ash-Shahristani is mentioned. Okay, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, not about 10 names mentioned, 9, 10 names mentioned. One of them is Shahristani. Okay, so he's in the top 10. Shahristani's in the top 10 according to Khalil. Now, what do we see? We see,
Jake, I think that
we see here what? Very clearly here. We see here from Mr. Khalil himself. Okay, the reality of God's attributes. What is it? The reality of God's attributes and names, his names and attributes. Ibn Sina, look what he quotes here, and Khalil actually does represent it accurately. Falsafa, Ibn Sina, Falsafa. All the verbal names of God describe negations of imperfection, relations, or both. So you have the negations, or the negative attributes, the relations which are affirmed, both of which are denied for the Ismailis, and God's necessity. All three are denied. Okay. Now, when it comes to the Ismailis, he says, the names of God describe perfections and powers that God originates within creation. So they're not actually ascribed to God in that way. They're not identical to his essence. They're created things that are ascribed to creation. Okay? So, now, on divine predication, who's the only person he mentions in this whole 20 minutes? Shahristani is the only Ismaili that he seems to quote, which he said he disagreed with. But now I'm showing there's ijma. I'm showing Nasr al-Khusra, showing all these secondary sources. I'm showing you what Ibn Sina believed and show how it's contradictory. He showed his own contradiction on his slide. When remember, this is the text we quoted earlier. He is knowing only in the sense that he causes whatever is knowing to know. He is powerful only in the sense that he empowers whatever is powerful, right? It's going on and on here. Now, matter of fact, you know, I'm going to bring that text. Did I bring that text up on the screen for you guys before? Let me see. I don't think I did. I don't think I did. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring that text on the screen for you guys, and I'm going to show you very clearly where he got that quote from and how it busts him down, really how it busts him down. It was in the section where he was actually refuting Ibn Sina himself. And it was in the section where he was actually refuting Ibn Sina. Let's see, okay, whatever. Okay, let's see. We got it right here. Okay. Okay, we got it right here. And this is a problem because it's one thing to have his deviant kufri beliefs, but to be dishonest is just another thing. And we don't like to do this, but sometimes we have to do it. I mean, sometimes we just have to do it. There's nothing really else we can do except to let people know that we can't accept this guy. We cannot accept this guy. Just keep doing this kind of crap and twisting things and trying to make people seem like they don't know what they're talking about. We know what we're talking about. You might not know, but we know. And the audience might know, but not know, but now they know. They're being educated. So let's show this right here. Let me stop sharing my screen. I want to show you. Okay, here we go. 1 second. Here we go. Yeah. So this is from the text. This is from the text that Khalil was just quoting, which is on divine predication. Now, here's how it starts off. It's in Struggling with the Philosopher, a refutation of Shahristani. And in his statement, the necessary of existence is one in respect of the perfection of its existence. He did not explain perfection and did not understand that perfection is a deficiency for him. Next one. One of the sages has said, the greatest self-sufficiency is to whom the creation and the command belong. Majestic is our Lord and exalted above being characterized by perfection, a fortiori, or by greater reason, of being characterized by deficiency. For he makes perfect whatever is perfect, and makes complete whatever is deficient. Then if Ibn Sina meant by perfection that he is perfect, that he perfects everything perfect, that is true. However, he is obliged to follow this proposition for every attribute, even for existence, so that he says he is existent in the sense that he existentializes every existent, meaning equivocal predication, not bil ishtirak, not by analogical predication, is necessary of existence in the sense that he necessitates every existent, is knowing in the sense that he causes whatever is knowing to know, and is powerful in the sense that he empowers whatever is powerful, which is the quote that Khalil was quoting. And then he forgot, he left this part out. Yet that is not the man's doctrine, meaning that is not Ibn Sina's doctrine. So in the very thing he quoted on the same page, he's saying Ibn Sina and Shahristani believe the same thing, but within that quote is a refutation of Ibn Sina and saying that that's not what he believed. Were that the doctrine he espoused, he would not have upheld the universality and inclusivity of existence. And he would not have judged that existence is amongst, and he would have judged that existence is amongst purely equivocal terms, as we explained above, meaning that he didn't do that. And Madlung said the same thing, that he believed that it was not an equivocal term, but that it was a what? An analogical or ambiguous term. What Ibn Sina mentioned above, that he is one in respect of the fact that his definition belongs to him alone, and one in respect to the fact, anyway, this is going on with something else. It doesn't really matter. The fact is, all of these terms, including existence, knowledge, power, are all amongst the equivocal. For Ibn Sina and philosophers, they're not equivocal. Some of them are analogical. They ascribe relative attributes, negative attributes, analogical attributes, and the fact that he's cause and necessary. All this stuff is not in agreement with the procedure that we have just explained from these Ismailis, right? So it's very clear here, folks. We're giving it to you. We're just showing you from these primary sources, from these secondary sources, very clearly. And Khalil needs to come out and tell us now that he's sorry for lying during the debate and showing up to do a debate, putting literally one person's quote and saying that he agrees with the other person, Ibn Sina, and that they believe in the same thing, when that very quote in context is actually refuting that other person, Ibn Sina. Imagine that. This is what the guy has done. Now let me link that back to how it's important and show you that it wasn't just Shahristani, some rogue guy doing that. It wasn't Shahristani doing it on some rogue stuff. No, not at all. Okay. It was the Ismaili position that he was representing, and he was not, it was the Ismaili position that he was representing, and he was not misrepresenting it. Unless Khalil wants to come out and condemn all these people. He can condemn Nasr Khosraw, which he said he was using in his debate, and then he's done. This whole thing is gone. You're not Ismaili, man. I recommend you go back to the Ismaili faith instead of getting into this 12er stuff, because it made you go a little loopy. I mean, we do invite you to Islam, of course, as I will do at all end of all these videos. But seriously, man, you're just a walking contradiction right now. So here's the text, command and creation, which is here, but just so you can see it up on the screen. This is by Shahristani. Okay. Now, let's see. As we said here, we went through it yesterday. Shahristani challenges the views of various theological schools, as well as those certain philosophers, such as Ibn Sina, and their engagement with the concept of God and his attributes. Wow, look at that. He's admitting that he's attacking Shahristani is attacking Ibn Sina on God and his attributes. And I know that Khalil admits this, but he just thought that Shahristani was wrong and just he's on an island by himself amongst the Ismailis. No, not at all. Not at all. Now, where is this other text here? I thought I had another one. No. Okay, anyway, we can go. Okay, here's the text that we want to deal with, where he says, the anthropomorphists held that there was an essence and a face for God. And their proof was the tradition which says he created Adam in the image of God. The Karamites maintained what? There's a physical locus and a direction for God, or considered him subsisting in an essence or primordial attribute. He had a jism or body. Their proof was he is omnipotent over his servants. The Esharis, an essence and eight pre-eternal attributes. Their proof, nor shall they compass, right? Nor shall they compass aught of his knowledge except as he willeth. The Mu'tazilis, or the Mu'tazilites, an essence for God and attributional characteristics. There you go, right there for you folks. Their proof, the living, the self-subsisting. The philosophers, an essence and negative and relative attributes, which we just showed you. Negative and relative attributes are affirmed by the philosophers. Their proof, what's their proof? The intellect. And at the root of each denomination, an anthropomorphism is implied and the negation is necessitated. So according to him, the breakdown of all these groups as Shahristani is they're all anthropomorphists. You Mu'tazila out there, you philosophers, or Mutafalsafa, you guys are all condemned by the Ismailis, and yet you're defending them. He's calling you anthropomorphists and saying that you must be rejected. Now we can look at it in the Persian, and we can show you. This is where the text starts. I've got it highlighted. Okay. All right. And here it is, where he talks about the philosophers. Talks about the philosophers and what? The negative and relational attributes. Mentions them very clearly. And what does it result in? Tashbih. Or what? Anthropomorphism. Okay. And what? They must be negated. It must be negated. Okay. So it's very clear, folks. It's very clear in the text that Shahristani is saying that what Ibn Sina affirmed, the negative and relational attributes, he's guilty of tashbih. And he's not on an island, because as I showed, and I'm going to do it now again, I'm going to read that quote from you to end it like this, to remind you guys that it's not just Shahristani saying this. That who else is it? It's Nasr al-Khusra, who was what? The hujjah of the Imam. He was the proof of the Imam. And I'm going to do a whole episode on what it means to be a proof of the Imam, to show you that you can't reject these guys so easily in Khalil's religion, because they believe that they received what's called divine inspiration. Sorry. They received divine inspiration. This is what they believe about the hujjas. Now, what does Nasr al-Khusra say? Remember those relative attributes, right? Remember those relative attributes. Well, Nasr al-Khusra says, okay, where is it? Let me see it. Relation. Okay, here we go. Nasr al-Khusra in 6 chapters, which is actually one of the texts that Khalil gave me to read for the debate that he said represents his theology. Here's what it says. God is he who has brought from non-being into being the initial being, so that existence and non-existence should both be created by him. Remember that the God of the philosophers is pure existence, which is what? For Khalil is what? Is actually the command of God, or the universal intellect. That's what he is for him, which means that if God created that for the Ismailis, the God of Ibn Sina was actually created supposedly by the God of the Ismailis. And we say both of these gods don't exist because they're false images. And we say that the true God is the God of the Quran wa Sunnah, and not this other foolishness they're coming with. But I'm showing you very clearly they don't have the same position. So now we see here what? He says here, existence should be both created by him and should stand side by side of each other by his command. This is because both the quality and what is qualified by it are under his power, while he himself in his ipseity, or his essence, is above everything. And nothing can have a relation to him, just as he said, say, God is one. Nothing can have a relationship to him. Why? Because, and here's the next quote, which shows you, quote, the categories of cause and effect do not apply to him. Property and being in possession of a property. Limit and being limited cannot be either attributed to him or denied to him, or having any likeness to him. He is beyond being or non-being, and you must realize that everything to which you may attribute existence may also be predicated with non-existence as an opposite state, and nothing which has an opposite can be God. So pure existence cannot be God. God is above existence. God is above non-existence. He's beyond being and non-being, all of which really makes no sense, but we'll get to that at another time. And God cannot be related to anything, and nothing can be related to him, because he's not a cause. He's a beyond cause and effect. Therefore, they do not have the same concepts of tawheed. Very clear for you folks. Clear demonstration. Now I'm showing you now what Khalil is going to have to do. He's going to have to come out and say, look, either the fact that, look, Jake, I'm sorry, I did taqiyya in the debate. I shouldn't have came out there and tried to make it seem and gloss it over as all this is just merely a semantic difference. It actually is a real metaphysical difference between the philosophers and Ismailis. You should come out and actually apologize and say, therefore, I forfeit and I lost the debate, and, you know, take it like a man. But you probably won't do that. And anyone who sees this video, make sure you like it, Make sure you share it. Make sure you tweet it at Khalil Andani himself and say, look, you got busted, man. Jake, the Muslim Metaphysician, busted you for your taqiyya, bringing you straight out the barrel with all these primary sources and secondary sources to quote you. You want the Arabic, you want the Farsi, we'll give it to you. We don't have a problem with it. So stop playing games, man. You got busted down. Very simple. And this is just a second lesson. We're going to do it again. We're going to do it again and again. But at the end of every stream, remember one thing. We want to invite you, Khalil, and the rest of the Ismailis and the Aga Khanis that are following this fake imam, this fake wannabe imam. We want to invite all of you to the true deen and the true religion of Islam, which is following the Quran wa Sunnah and not this other foolishness that you guys are following. Okay? So please, we invite you to the haqq, and we will finish as we will, as always, like we do in these streams. And I'll probably see you guys later this week, possibly on Friday, probably Friday evening. Will become a third video, and that one will probably be on Shahristani to show you that it's not merely just that it's not just merely Shahristani. It's not merely the secondary sources. It's not merely Nasr al-Khusra, who says God can't be related to anything and nothing can be related to him. It's not merely him. We're going to show you from Abu Yaqub as-Sijistani, which is the next person that Khalil endorsed directly from the debate itself. Okay, and Mr. Another Letter, you didn't make me mad, but well, you made me mad in the sense that you're insulting other people in the chat, not just me. Forget about me, but you're insulting other people in the chat. You're distracting from the lesson, man. You guys are talking foolish nonsense instead of paying attention to this stuff. You're not going to get this stuff on any other channel where you get breakdowns like this. Who else is cracking open these books from the Ismailis? Nobody's reading this stuff. That's why, to be honest, most of you or half of you didn't even understand the critique and how devastating it was that I was giving it in the debate. Why? Because you didn't know very clearly that Khalil was trying to debate under the banner of Islamic philosophy and include all these other groups, Ibn Sina and Shahristani and all these people at the same time, when they don't believe in the same thing. And they say that the other is guilty of anthropomorphism and polytheism. So how can you define? That's like me coming into the debate and what? And I'm going to defend the Ash'aris, the Maturidis, and the Ethiris, and throw in the Mu'tazila as well, for good measure, all at the same time. No. You're giving me a target that is something that can't be hit because it's a square circle. It's a contradiction. It doesn't even exist, right? And then he tried to smooth it over and act as if, no, these are all just semantic differences. Ibn Sina believes the same thing. He doesn't believe the same thing, man. You're stretching it too much. You're desperate. Okay? So we exposed Khalil, but just because we exposed him doesn't mean that we don't want him to come to Islam. We invite him to Islam and all the other Ismailis, because the reality is you guys are not Muslims. So stop acting like Muslim until you can retake your Shahada and actually embrace the faith and stop faking the funk. But until next time, guys, inshallah, which is probably going to be this Friday and this coming weekend in general, I'll see you guys next time, inshallah. بل نقذف بالحق على الباطل فيدمغه فإذا هو زاهق ولكم الويل مما تصفون. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.